And now, please welcome to the stage, Nuria Fernandez, APTA Vice Chair.
Good afternoon. Don't you all agree that today's the first day of the session, that is the conference, started out with a bang? I thought it was terrific. So let's give a round of applause to APTA. We have had a twice Pulitzer Prize winner, and followed by our favorite grant maker. And of course, in typical APTA fashion, we had a break with some humor, and that was quite fun. But now we're going to get back to the business of the legislative session. I am Nuria Fernandez, and I serve as APTA's Vice Chair on the Executive Committee and the Board of Directors. I'm also the General Manager, CEO for the Valley Transportation Authority in Santa Clara County, California. And today, we have the pleasure and distinct honor to welcome Derek Kahn, who is the Undersecretary for Transportation Policy and serves as an advisor to Secretary Elaine Chao at USDOT. Derek started his career as a presidential management fellow at the White House and the Office of Management and Budget. He then followed up to Capitol Hill, serving as a policy advisor to Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, as the chief economist for the Senate Republican Policy Committee. Derek has also been on the board of Amtrak, and he ended up back west in my neck of the woods as the general manager for Lyft in California. Prior to his appointment as Undersecretary of Transportation Policy, you can see that he's been close to the transportation industry in different ways. And we are very honored that he has taken time to come and share some insights on the various policies that are going to be driving transportation in the years to come. Please join me in welcoming Derek Kahn.
Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for visiting DC. I know a lot of you have big systems to run. Before I begin, I wanted to just say thanks to a few people here. First of all, thanks, Paul, for organizing. It's a great organization. APTA is perhaps one of the most critically situated organizations in our country today when it comes to mobility and public transportation, and I'll touch a little bit about that shortly. But the jobs you have as owners and operators of some of the largest transportation systems in the world play a critical role at a time in which transportation is fundamentally changing. And so as you think about your roles, it's not simply being an owner or an operator of a public transit system, it's really how do you use mobility and mobility options to rediscover community in each of your cities and states. I also wanted to really give a shout out to Jane Williams and to Matt Welbus. The two of them are just fantastic. Everybody in this room lines up outside of Jane's door asking for money and asking for how quickly she could process it. She turns to Matt, and the two of them have to sort out all of the folks in this room, asking them to prioritize their projects. How does she manage with a scarce sort of set of resources, both in terms of dollars and FTE? So thank you, Jane, and thank you, Matt, for your leadership and just a wonderful mode. I wanted to speak today about two quick items. One, on infrastructure and surface transportation reauthorization, and two, on innovation. As many folks here know, earlier today and last week, the administration released our budget. And a budget, as folks know, is a reflection of administration priorities. And this year we proposed probably one account that folks here think a lot about is CIG. We proposed a $1.5 billion request for CIG, including $500 million in new CIG money. I know that for some this was not enough. For probably most of this room, that was not enough. But I would also point out that the folks you really want to talk to will be the folks on the panel right after me, so you can save your questions and asking them after, because after me are the people who really control the purse strings, which are the appropriators and authorizers on the Hill. So I think the panel after me will be very receptive and sort of the core folks to talk to in terms of additional resources. As folks may have seen at the State of the Union and follow the coverage following, there is clear bipartisan support for a massive infrastructure package. And I saw, Paul, the release from APTA just about an hour ago on $232 billion over the next 10 years in transit, a 4-to-1 return on investment in public transit. And I think that's helpful in terms of the debate we're going to have. And I think the debate we're going to have is going to focus on a few things. One is the dollars, but beyond the dollars, how are we going to spend this money? And what are the priorities and programs and eligibilities for that? And I think that's one area where we probably can all agree that we need to broaden the eligibility so that the funds you get are not for just a specific purpose, but as you all are owners and operators, to determine how to most flexibly and most ably use the capital that the federal government provides to you. And so I wanted to start laying out some of the big themes we have on surface transportation reauthorization and infrastructure reauthorization, how I see it, how one man's perspective is of this playing out, and then conclude by talking about innovation. We sort of see 4 or 5 major themes or ideas as we begin to debate and discuss infrastructure. First of all, we need to define the federal role. Folks here love to come to DC, ask us for additional grants, additional funding, but as everybody here knows, when we give you money, we also give attached to that a long list of requirements. Probably more requirements for some than is worth the money. So we have Buy America, Davis-Bacon, we have EIS's environmental studies. So we have a lot of requirements that are set forth at the federal level. And one of the questions we have is, what is the role of the federal government here? If we are going to give you just 1% of a specific project, does it make sense that the entire project should be subject to all federal rules? And so one of the questions and one of the proposals we're contemplating is there a way we can increase flexibilities, not only for transit, but for all highway programs as we provide funding to cities and states? We believe that at the end of the day, folks closest to their citizens are best to make the decisions. And so one of the major themes of the administration is how to empower each of you to make decisions that is most appropriate for your specific transit system. Number 2, take care of what you have. We believe that given all the needs we have in all modes of transportation, we need to first prioritize fixing it first. That instead of building out new things, let's figure out where are the most significant needs and deploy capital where there are current deteriorating and poor quality. For instance, there are more than 47,000 bridges throughout the nation that are in poor condition and in need of repair. And roughly 22% of pavement for the highways program has poor ride quality. And so as we look at the formula funding, we should focus on how do we think about focusing on maintenance and repairing what we have versus new construction. Number 3, as you look at all transportation programs, there's oftentimes a disproportionate focus on rural and urban. And oftentimes, and maybe this isn't particularly the case with transit programs, but across most modes, there's a heavy emphasis on urban, just the way formulas are drafted. And we need to recognize about 60 million Americans live in rural communities. Rural communities also need transit, and they need oftentimes greater services that make it very difficult to find pay-fors and revenue streams to support transit in rural areas. And so what we're looking at is how do we rebalance and ensure that we've invested adequately in rural America as well as urban. Number 4, building infrastructure more efficiently. The environmental review process, the permitting process just take way too long. Anybody here who's built a significant project can attest that the processes we have at the federal government oftentimes don't add to a process. In fact, it just creates more and more layers of red tape, of processes. And so what we hope to see is Congress codifying one federal decision. For instance, when we started, most agencies would process permits sequentially. When we'd finish, we'd give it to another agency. We pass it off to Department of Interior. After the Department of Interior was done, they'd pass it off to the Army Corps of Engineers. After the Army Corps was done, they'd pass it off to the Department of Energy. After the Department of Energy was done, they'd pass it out to say, hey, does anybody have any changes? And we'd say, wait, we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen the latest version. Let's start all over. And this process would go on forever. In some situations, it's gone on for decades. In fact, Secretary Chow was in Alaska and approved a 40-year EIS because it had been sitting at the Department of Transportation and floating through the interagency process for literally decades. And so one of the processes we have is how do we help you as you seek to deliver new projects, build infrastructure more efficiently? And are there things around right-of-ways and things that we could delegate to states to help improve project delivery? And finally, preparing for the future. Emerging technologies have the potential to impact safety significantly by reducing crashes caused by human error and really improving crashes from impaired driving. And as we look at all of the programs we have, how do we prepare for the future? And this isn't simply at NHTSA and roads, but across the department. And so I wanted to take a moment to talk about mobility. This is the Association of Public Transportation for America, or American Public Transportation Association. And what we are seeing now is an evolution to what public transit means. If you look at the data we provide at the department, we survey how people travel. 70% of all trips in America are 10 miles or less. And there are roughly 411 billion trips per year throughout the country. 411 billion trips. Now, 300 billion of those are done 10 miles or less, which means public transit or new mobility options are ideal modes of transportation. And so I challenge the folks in this room to, instead of thinking you run simply a bus system or a metro system, you actually are responsible for all of the new mobility options in your city. I remember when I was at Lyft, I would die to meet with Phil Washington. Phil may actually be here. I don't know if Phil's here, but he was here earlier, and we would literally knock on the door of each of you for months, and we'd hire consultants to try to get in to meet with you. And one thing that I've always been surprised at in this role is each of you who own a transit system have so much power and influence. And so much power and influence to the ride-sharing companies, to the scooter companies, because they would love to figure out how to integrate their system with yours. And when I say you have a lot of power, there are a few ways in which you have power. For those of you that have Metro cards in your system, you have a few 100,000 people, maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people that ride transit. And you understand their transportation patterns. Now, what you will see likely in the coming year, what you've seen in Denver, is companies like Uber are seeking to integrate with transit systems and provide last mile services to your users. And so I want to underscore this. As transit operators, there is so much authority and influence you have in how your cities are designed. And all these new startups are looking to you to try to figure out if there are partnerships that you could develop. It's interesting because as I, in my previous role, would talk to transit operators, oftentimes the focus would be upon selling marketing collateral in stations and buses. And that's true, that's important. However, the most important thing ride-sharing companies are looking from you is the customers, the passengers you have, and two, access, specifically ingress and regress to each of your stations, if there could be a dedicated ride-sharing or car-sharing lot for the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. And I bring this up to you because as you have these conversations, you should go to the table recognizing that you have an immense set of powers and authorities, and they would die to spend time with you. And we're already seeing this change quickly. The biggest change in traffic patterns and mobility patterns are largely in young adults who are 16 to 45 years old, who are sort of in the 0 to 5 mile range. If you think about that demographic also tracks largely with the primary users of transit systems across the country. And so you're seeing mobility patterns evolve most significantly in a population in which transit systems here use and rely upon. And so I would encourage folks and challenge folks here to think of the new partnerships and new creative ways in which you can look to ride-sharing to bring more customers to transit platforms. Oftentimes when we talk about innovation, two main technologies get all the focus: autonomous vehicles and drones. But that's only the surface, and that's only the bright, shiny things. Innovation occurs in all forms and in so many different ways. In Georgia, for instance, there was a recognition that federal highways and the state of Georgia took a long time to have projects delivered. And so what the head of Georgia State DOT said is, you know what, let's co-locate the feds with the state officials. We'll find spaces, we'll find desks, and have them sit here. And suddenly, instead of emailing your counterpart on the other side of town and waiting for 2 weeks for a reply, you could walk over to their desk. And this co-location, as simple as it seems, enhanced coordination and accelerated project delivery. Each of you that own and operate systems across the country, each of you as public transit operators, can advance such innovative ideas. And there are really two technology-based ideas I see that are relevant, and I see it disrupting transit in ways in which we can't even begin to imagine. The first is around payments and intermodalism, and the second is around transit system design. A number of promising startups, about 4 by my count, are trying to create a single app where you could pay for a trip, where you take a subway or a public transit system for a portion, and then use last mile, use ride sharing for the last mile, all with a single fare. And not only does this make payment easier, it allows you to create options to help people make trade-offs between cost and time. For instance, I could take an hour to go home, and it would be $5, or I could take 30 minutes, a hybrid of the Washington Metro and rideshare, and it would take 30 minutes, but it'd cost $10. Now the integration of payments into your systems and the integration of mobility options into your systems unlock not only new passengers and new citizens in your cities to help serve, but it also allows new technologies to help deliver better transportation for the user at the end of the day. And these apps are giving people options like we have never seen before. There's really 3 or 4 main ones, and they've already begun to scale. We see one in Europe, I believe it's in Norway, and I'm grabbing a few folks after. If you grab me after, I could talk to you more about it, but these apps are trying to enter and better understand how you serve your customers. A second major technology evolution we see are a couple of young nascent startups helping cities better manage their transit systems through better planning. Historically, rerouting a transit map or building a new bus route would take decades. It'd take decades of studies. You'd have to view traffic, population studies, and it would literally take 10 years to rebuild a new bus route. However, today there are new startups saying, let's look at app data to see who's transiting to and from specific parts of town and help transit systems develop new bus routes or modify existing. I was in Houston last week and I was talking to Tom Lambert there who runs Houston Metro, and he was telling me how they've used some of this data to rebuild their bus route network. And so this is one of the main innovations I see for folks in this room, that there is so much innovation at our fingertips, and each of you in your cities is the sandbox to encourage this innovation to occur. And it's not simply autonomous vehicles or self-driving shuttles, though that's part of it, but it's how do we provide the best transportation to the most citizens at the lowest possible cost to all of us, to the cities, to the feds in total. How do we deliver the best transportation at the best cost for as many people as possible? And this leads to a basic question of what are we at the department doing differently, and how are we evolving? There's a few things. First of all, the Secretary has very much focused on the need for preparing for the future. We need to make sure that the programs we have aren't simply stovepipe programs that were established in the mid-20th century, in the mid-1900s, and how do we evolve them today? No, we need to look at these programs and broaden eligibilities, increase flexibilities. We hope that as we kick off surface transportation reauthorization, that this will be part of the debate. How are programs, not only in transit, but across the department, tailored for the needs of today? Number two, oftentimes we have policy questions that come before the department that are really stovepipe, that are really sort of fixated upon the org structure of DOT. For instance, the Hyperloop, which is in maybe a half dozen cities or a half dozen cities around the country is trying to talk about Hyperloop, boring a tunnel underneath the city that will have some sort of fixed guide rail or fixed pathways of vehicles. Is this a subway? Is this an underground highway? Is this some form of aviation if it's using a vacuum tube? Well, at the Department of Transportation, we don't have an easy way to send this program to a specific office. If we turned to Jane and said, here, FTA, here's Elon Musk, good luck. Oftentimes we need a way to translate and to ensure that each of the modes who have different expertise are at the table. So last week, Secretary Chao announced that we are creating a new Emerging Technologies Council. And this council is made up of all of the modal administrators. It's chaired by the Deputy Secretary and vice chaired by me. And our goal is to bring technologies that are before the department that don't fit neatly in any particular mode. And how do we accelerate and really figure out lines of jurisdiction? Our hope is, our number one priority is safety. And oftentimes with new technologies, two things happen. Somebody says, a mode comes and says, I don't know what to do with this, it's not mine. Or a mode will say, I don't know what to do with this, I could take care of 20% of it, or 40% of it, or a portion of it. Neither of those are adequate. What we need are the greatest minds at the department sitting around the table, evaluating these new technologies, and figuring out, do we have the authorities to move forward? And so the NET Council will be one way in which we're reorganizing our internal processes to allow for new and emerging technologies. And finally, new entry, new business models, new technologies, these are part of what makes America great. And the creativity, the innovation of our nation is driving transit systems like all technologies forward. But that also raises very complicated policy questions for the department. How do we manage these new technologies? How do we ensure that safety is number one? And one of the most important ways are through forums like this. Each of you have taken a few days out of your schedule to come to Washington to hear me drone on and on, to meet with Capitol Hill, and that is incredibly helpful. In fact, sharing with us some of the problems you see, some of the best practices you've identified, some of the creative things you're doing, this is how we learn from each other and we pass it along to others. And so I just wanted to conclude my remarks by saying thank you. Thank you for the service each of you provide to your respective cities and states. Thank you for coming to Washington today to spend time with us and share with us your ideas. And most importantly, thank you for being the tip of the spear when it comes to innovation in technology. Because self-driving cars, self-flying cars in space, those things are great. Those things are probably also 50 years away or 20 years away. But the ability for rideshare to be integrated to a subway system, the ability to figure out how a transit system should be redesigned, those things will be before us in the coming years. And it's only together in this room that we can solve these things. So thank you all for your service. Really appreciate the time.
Derek, thank you very, very much for joining us today, for sharing your sense of vision from the department's perspective of the future. I can tell you there's great resonance with what you've said in terms of our industry and our members. So we look forward to working with you very, very closely over the next number of months and years. And so thank you again.